In the winter of 2007, inside millions of pockets around the world, there was a Nokia phone. And if you had asked almost anyone back then which company would control the future of mobile technology, most people probably would have answered the same way. Nokia, not Apple, not Google, not some startup hidden somewhere in Silicon Valley. Because at that moment, Nokia looked almost impossible to defeat. The company was everywhere. Its phones were everywhere. And what makes this story so fascinating is that Nokia didn't lose because it completely missed the future. In many ways, it actually saw the future earlier than almost everyone else. Which raises a strange question. How does a company dominate the entire world, understand where technology is going, and still lose everything? On crowded trains in Tokyo, in small towns across India, inside offices in London, cafes in Brazil, classrooms in Poland, taxis in New York, the same familiar sound could be heard everywhere, that ringtone. For years, Nokia didn't just sell phones, it shaped the rhythm of everyday life. People trusted Nokia in a way that feels almost impossible today. A Nokia phone could fall down concrete stairs, survive rain, survive heat, survive years of use, and still turn on like nothing happened. Parents bought Nokia phones for their children. Businessmen carried them into meetings. Teenagers used them to send awkward first text messages late at night. And for a moment, it seemed completely obvious that Nokia would dominate the future. Then something strange happened. In less than a decade, the most powerful phone company on Earth became almost irrelevant. Not because people suddenly hated Nokia, not because the company lacked money, not because its engineers were stupid. In fact, many of the technologies that created the smartphone era already existed inside Nokia years before the iPhone arrived. And that's what makes this story so fascinating. Because Nokia didn't collapse overnight. It slowly drifted into a crisis that many people inside the company could already feel, while the outside world still believed everything was fine. Somewhere inside massive office buildings in Finland, employees were beginning to understand a terrifying possibility. The company that once connected the world might no longer understand where the world was going. To understand how that happened, you have to go back much further than smartphones. Back to forests, paper mills, cold Nordic winters, and a company that had absolutely nothing to do with phones. Long before Nokia became a technology giant, it was just a small industrial business in Finland. The company was founded in the 19th century during a completely different world. Europe looked different, technology looked different, even electricity still felt mysterious to many people. Nokia originally produced paper, later rubber products, then cables. At one point, the company made things like boots and tires. It wasn't a glamorous technology startup. It was a practical Nordic industrial company trying to survive in a harsh environment. And maybe that matters more than people realize, because the culture that later made Nokia successful was built on discipline, engineering, and survival, not on flashy innovation, not on Silicon Valley-style dreams. For decades, Nokia kept evolving, step by step, industry by industry. Then, during the late 20th century, something changed. Telecommunications started becoming one of the most important industries in the world. The idea of people carrying personal mobile devices still sounded futuristic to many. But Nokia saw opportunity. And unlike many companies at the time, Nokia moved aggressively. By the 1980s and early 90s, mobile technology was still awkward. Phones were huge, expensive, heavy. Some looked more like military equipment than consumer products. But Nokia believed mobile communication would eventually become personal, simple, every day. That belief would change the company forever. At the beginning of the 1990s, Nokia was actually struggling. Finland entered a severe economic crisis. The Soviet Union collapsed, hurting Finnish trade. And inside Nokia, there was confusion about the future. The company operated in many industries at once: televisions, computers, consumer electronics, industrial products. It lacked focus. Then came one of the most important decisions in Nokia's history. The company decided to focus almost entirely on telecommunications. It was a massive gamble. At the time, nobody knew whether mobile phones would truly become global consumer products. But Nokia committed itself completely. And suddenly, everything started accelerating. The timing was almost perfect. During the 1990s, mobile networks expanded rapidly across Europe and other parts of the world. More people wanted mobile phones. And Nokia understood something extremely important. Technology alone wasn't enough. People wanted phones that felt human, friendly, reliable, easy to use. Nokia became brilliant at simplicity. Its phones had clear menus, strong batteries, durable designs, and perhaps most importantly, people trusted them. Trust is difficult to measure, but in technology, it changes everything. When consumers feel uncertain about new technology, they choose the brand that feels safe. And during the late 90s and early 2000s, Nokia felt safer than everyone else. The company grew incredibly fast. Inside Finland, Nokia became almost legendary. The company transformed the national economy. It created jobs, pride, and international attention. For many Finns, Nokia wasn't just a corporation. It became part of national identity. And globally, Nokia was becoming unstoppable. The famous Nokia 3310 became one of the most iconic phones ever made. It was simple, almost indestructible, and strangely lovable. People still joke about it today, not because of marketing, because millions genuinely experienced how reliable it was. But while customers saw simplicity, inside Nokia, things were becoming more complicated. As the company expanded, it became enormous. Thousands of employees, layers of management, different departments competing internally, endless meetings, complex decision-making. Success was slowly creating bureaucracy. And this happens more often than people realize. A company becomes successful because it moves quickly. Then it grows larger. And eventually, protecting success becomes more important than risking change. At first, nobody notices. The numbers still look amazing. Profits continue rising. Customers continue buying. But internally, fear slowly appears. Not fear of failure. Fear of disrupting the system that already works. By the early 2000s, Nokia dominated the global phone market. In some years, its market share was astonishing. The company sold hundreds of millions of phones. Competitors struggled to catch up. Motorola had moments of success. BlackBerry became popular among business users. Sony Ericsson attracted younger consumers. But Nokia still felt untouchable. And that's often the most dangerous moment for any company, when success becomes normal, when dominance feels permanent, when nobody inside truly believes collapse is possible. Meanwhile, technology itself was changing, quietly at first. The internet was becoming more important. People wanted more than calls and text messages. Phones were slowly evolving into portable computers. And Nokia actually saw much of this coming. That's one of the great ironies of the story. Years before the iPhone, Nokia engineers were already experimenting with advanced mobile internet concepts. Touchscreen ideas existed. Smartphone prototypes existed. internet-focused devices existed, but seeing the future is different from executing it. Inside Nokia, there were growing tensions between hardware teams, software teams, and executives. The company produced many devices, many operating systems, many strategies at the same time. One of the biggest problems was software. Nokia's Symbian operating system had once seemed advanced, but over time, it became increasingly difficult to modernize. Developers complained, engineers struggled, the system became complicated and fragmentation creates invisible problems. From the outside, customers still saw functioning phones, but internally, teams were fighting technical limitations every single day. At the same time, the culture inside Nokia was becoming more cautious. Several former employees later described an atmosphere where bad news sometimes moved slowly upward through management. People feared making mistakes, some feared challenging leadership, and in fast-moving industries, fear inside an organization can quietly destroy innovation. Then came 2007. Apple introduced the iPhone. At first, many people inside the traditional phone industry weren't impressed. The first iPhone lacked features that competitors already had. It was expensive, it had limitations, and importantly, Nokia still dominated global sales. From a distance, Apple didn't yet look like an existential threat. But something deeper was happening. The iPhone changed how people emotionally experience technology. And inside Nokia, some employees immediately understood how dangerous that was. Not because the iPhone was technically perfect, it wasn't, but because for the first time, a phone felt less like electronics and more like an experience. Smooth glass, finger gestures, animation, scrolling, apps. Suddenly, phones weren't just tools anymore, they were emotional objects. Somewhere inside Nokia offices, engineers who had spent years building hardware were beginning to realize something deeply uncomfortable. The rules of the industry were changing, while millions of customers still believed Nokia was winning. Before smartphones, phones were mostly tools. The iPhone made the phone feel alive, fluid, personal, beautiful. Suddenly, software experience mattered as much as hardware, maybe more. And that shift would become catastrophic for Nokia, because Nokia still thought like a hardware company. Apple thought like a software ecosystem company. Those are very different worlds. Meanwhile, another competitor was quietly entering the scene. Google's Android platform. And Android changed the entire industry. Unlike Apple's closed ecosystem, Android spread across many manufacturers. Samsung, HTC, LG, Sony, and others rapidly adopted it. Suddenly, the market was moving incredibly fast. Consumers now expected smooth touchscreens, powerful apps, mobile internet, entertainment, social media, and constant software improvement. Phones were no longer just communication devices. They were becoming extensions of identity. And Nokia struggled to adapt psychologically to this shift. The company still had brilliant engineers, still had resources, still had global distribution. But large organizations often struggle when success was built for a different era. Nokia had mastered the world of mobile phones, but smartphones required a completely different mindset. And internally, pressure was rising. Executives debated strategy. Teams argued about platforms. Deadlines slipped. Competitors accelerated. Meanwhile, customers were changing faster than Nokia expected. That's another fascinating part of technological disruption. Consumers themselves often don't realize how quickly their habits are evolving. One year, physical keyboards feel essential. Then suddenly, they feel outdated. One year, Downloading apps sounds unnecessary. Then suddenly, people can't imagine life without them. Human behavior changes slowly until it changes all at once. Nokia launched touchscreen devices. It launched smartphones. Some were technically impressive, but the overall experience often felt inconsistent, confusing, slower than competitors. And in technology, once users emotionally feel that a product belongs to the past, recovery becomes extremely difficult. Inside Nokia, stress intensified. Employees later described exhausting internal politics. Some former insiders explained that many people inside the company already knew serious problems existed, but communicating those problems upward became increasingly difficult. Managers feared delivering bad news. Teams protected their own projects. Deadlines became political. Slowly, something dangerous started spreading through the company. Not incompetence, fear, fear of being blamed, fear of failure, fear of admitting that competitors were moving faster. One former Nokia manager later described an atmosphere where people sometimes told leaders what they wanted to hear instead of what they needed to hear. And in fast-moving industries, that kind of silence can become deadly. Different divisions competing for influence, fear spreading through management. And while Nokia hesitated, Apple and Android ecosystems kept improving month after month. Developers increasingly focused on iOS and Android. Consumers followed the apps. And once app ecosystems become dominant, momentum becomes brutally difficult to stop. Because modern technology isn't just about products anymore, it's about ecosystems. People weren't only buying phones, they were buying access. Access to apps, to services, to digital lifestyles, to social environments. Nokia still excelled at hardware reliability, but the center of power had moved somewhere else. Then came one of the most controversial decisions in Nokia's history. In 2011, Nokia announced a strategic partnership with Microsoft. Stephen Elop, Nokia's CEO at the time and former Microsoft executive, argued that Nokia needed radical change. He famously described Nokia as a company standing on a burning platform. The message shocked many employees. Internally, morale became deeply complicated. Some believed drastic action was necessary. Others feared Nokia was abandoning its own identity. The decision meant moving away from Symbian and adopting Microsoft's Windows Phone platform. At first, the partnership sounded logical. Microsoft had enormous resources. Nokia had global hardware expertise. Together, perhaps they could compete against Apple and Android. But reality was much harsher. Developers still focused mostly on iOS and Android. Consumers hesitated to enter a weaker app ecosystem. Meanwhile, Samsung and other Android manufacturers continued growing aggressively. The Lumia phones Nokia released were often beautifully designed. Many reviewers actually liked them. The cameras impressed people. The hardware quality remained strong. But timing matters in technology. Sometimes even good products arrive too late. By then, the smartphone market was rapidly consolidating around two dominant ecosystems, Apple and Android. Nokia was no longer shaping the industry. It was reacting to it. And psychologically, that changes everything inside a company. For years, Nokia employees had lived inside a culture of dominance. Now, they were constantly defending themselves, explaining delays, watching competitors lead the conversation. That kind of transition is emotionally exhausting, especially because many people inside Nokia genuinely cared deeply about the company. This wasn't a cynical organization full of lazy people. Many employees were highly talented and deeply committed, but talent alone doesn't guarantee survival. Sometimes entire organizations become trapped by earlier success. Processes that once created stability become barriers. Hierarchies slow decision-making. Fear prevents honesty. Slowly, the company loses its ability to adapt at the speed the market demands. By 2013, the situation had become impossible to ignore. Microsoft announced it would acquire Nokia's mobile phone business. For many people, it felt surreal. Imagine spending years working at the most powerful phone company on Earth. Imagine watching your products dominate airports, offices, classrooms, entire countries. And then one day, sitting in a quiet office meeting while people discuss selling the business that once made your company untouchable. That emotional shock is difficult to fully describe, because Nokia's collapse didn't feel like a dramatic explosion. It felt more like slowly realizing that the future had already moved somewhere else. The company that once dominated the global mobile industry was effectively surrendering control of the business that made it famous. Inside Finland, the emotional impact was enormous. Nokia had represented much more than phones. It symbolized national achievement, a small country proving itself on the world stage. And now that era was ending. There's a painful scene often described by people who followed the company closely. When the acquisition was announced, Stephen Elop reportedly became emotional during internal meetings. Employees cried. Some felt relief. Others felt betrayal. Others simply felt exhausted. Because collapse rarely feels cinematic when you're living. Inside it, it feels confusing, slow, messy, filled with uncertainty. And maybe that's one of the most human parts of the Nokia story. From the outside, people often search for one simple explanation. The iPhone killed Nokia. Nokia was arrogant. Nokia ignored innovation. Reality is more uncomfortable. Nokia actually saw many future trends early. It had brilliant people. It had resources. It had market power most companies only dream about. But modern technological change moves brutally fast. And organizations built for one era often struggle to reinvent themselves for another, especially when they are already successful. Because success changes psychology. When a company dominates for years, employees naturally begin protecting what already works. Radical change feels dangerous, risky, unnecessary. Meanwhile, startups have the opposite psychology. They risk everything because they have little to lose. That difference creates asymmetry, and asymmetry destroys giants surprisingly often. Kodak invented digital photography but struggled to embrace it. Blockbuster underestimated streaming. BlackBerry misunderstood touchscreen culture. Nokia became part of that same pattern, not because its people were foolish, but because large systems often resist painful transformation until it's too late. There's another deeper layer to this story too. Technology companies don't merely sell devices. They shape habits, and habits become emotional. For years, people loved Nokia because it offered reliability and simplicity. That matched the emotional needs of the mobile era. But the smartphone era created different emotional desires. People wanted constant connection, entertainment, identity, creativity, personalization, and social ecosystems. The phone stopped being a tool. It became a digital companion. And Apple, Google, and Android manufacturers understood that emotional transformation faster. Nokia kept improving phones. The market had already moved toward experiences. That subtle difference changed everything. But the story doesn't completely end with collapse. Even after losing its mobile phone dominance, Nokia survived. And that itself is remarkable. Many companies disappear entirely after such disasters. Nokia adapted again. The company shifted toward telecommunications infrastructure, networking technology, and business services. Today, Nokia still exists. It works on network equipment, 5G infrastructure, and large-scale telecommunications systems. It no longer dominates public imagination the way it once did. Most young people probably don't emotionally connect with the Nokia name anymore. But the company survived. And maybe survival itself reveals something important. Because the Nokia story isn't really about one bad phone, or one executive, or one decision. It's about how difficult adaptation becomes when the world changes faster than the systems designed to control it. And honestly, that pressure exists everywhere now, not only in technology companies, in careers, industries, entire economies. The modern world rewards adaptation relentlessly, sometimes almost cruelly. And psychologically, humans struggle with that. We become attached to routines, to systems, to identities that once brought success. But technological revolutions rarely care about emotional comfort. That's why the Nokia story still feels strangely emotional today. Because almost everyone remembers a moment when Nokia seemed permanent. A Nokia phone sitting on a kitchen table. A cracked screen that somehow still worked. A tiny glowing display late at night. A ringtone echoing through crowded streets. For millions of people, Nokia wasn't just technology. It was part of ordinary life. And maybe that's why its fall feels so memorable. Because deep down, people weren't just watching a company fail. They were watching something psychologically unsettling. A giant that looked permanent. A brand trusted by hundreds of millions. A company filled with talented people. And still, it happened. Which forces an uncomfortable thought. If something as powerful as Nokia could lose the future so quickly, what else around us only looks permanent right now? Not because companies fail all the time, but because Nokia once felt impossible to destroy, and then the future arrived anyway. Quietly at first, then all at once. Today, the smartphone industry looks completely different. Apple and Samsung dominate globally. Chinese manufacturers compete aggressively. Artificial intelligence is starting to reshape devices yet again. And somewhere inside modern technology companies, executives are probably asking themselves the same frightening question Nokia once faced. What if the next transformation is already happening while we still believe we're in control? That's the uncomfortable truth hidden inside this story. The companies that look strongest are often the ones most vulnerable to change they don't emotionally understand yet, because disruption rarely announces itself clearly. At first, it looks smaller than expected, weaker than expected, unimportant, until suddenly it isn't. And maybe that's the real reason the Nokia story still matters. Not because a famous company lost market share, but because it revealed something deeply human. The things that make us successful in one era can quietly trap us in the next. Somewhere in a drawer, in millions of homes around the world, old Nokia phones still exist. Silent now, scratched, heavy, outdated, but still strangely alive. Little reminders of a moment when one company connected almost the entire planet and believed that connection would last forever.
Thank you so much for listening to this audiobook. I truly hope these words inspired you, motivated you, and gave you something valuable to take with you into everyday life. If you enjoyed this recording, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and explore my other inspiring audiobooks created to support your growth, mindset, and motivation. Your support means a lot and helps me create more content for listeners like you. See you in the next audiobook.